this is going to be one of my most ambitious series I've done on this channel so far. I've talked about music, total drama, and made some short films. But one thing I've yet to touch on, apart from a review here and there, are video games. So, I figured, why not tackle all of them at once? In this video series, I am going to be compiling what I consider to be the most difficult stage in every video game I've ever played, and ranking them from easiest to hardest, ranging from hilariously easy all the way to excruciatingly impossible. But before we get into that, let me explain how this list is going to work. Okay, so obviously this video's title is clickbait. This list doesn't actually cover every single game I've ever played, because that would be insane. For the most part, the entries that I did include are games that I've either reached 100% completion on, or got close enough to it that I feel confident enough to determine what the hardest level is in that game, in my opinion. There are countless games that I either haven't played enough of, can't qualify for this list for various reasons, or just sadly didn't make the cut because, like, this list is already long enough as is. A lot of those cuts are going to consist of newer games too, because, well, don't feel like adding them if they're brand new. Silksong, that new Donkey Kong game, and Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 are prime examples of this. Maybe I'll do another one of these types of videos in a couple of years and include them then. But with a grand total of 60 video games already in the mix, yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. Well, actually, 2 of the games I actually felt the need to include 2 entries from, and I'll explain why much later. So we actually have 62 entries. But yeah, no more after that. It's also worth mentioning that while some games have a very obvious level that's the peak of difficulty in its game and therefore will obviously get chosen, other games have a less obvious and much more subjective choice, and as such, some of the levels on this list might actually surprise you. Finally, while there is a decent amount of variety on this list, if you're expecting it to be evenly distributed, then think again. Like, a third of this list is just Mario games, and Nintendo swallows up even more than that, so yeah, get ready for that. Oh, and one more thing. Not all of the music I use in this video is gonna align perfectly with the level, or even the game that I'm covering in any given section. Some of them will, obviously, but I just picked which song I thought would fit the section the most instead of what's actually accurate to the game. So if you're thinking about typing a comment correcting me, trust me, I already know. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's start off with disappointment in the video game! So what is the absolute easiest, unchallenging, minimal effort required level of all time? Well, a lot of people might assume a Mario game would be on the bottom of this list, since I did mention there'd be a lot of those, and some of them are known for being easy, right? Wrong! Allow me to introduce you to Rainforest Adventure from nickjr.com. This is probably the only game on this list that a literal, actual toddler might be able to beat. Basically, what you gotta do is control Diego and look for 5 animals in the forest in each level, then go to the shack at the end and you're done. There is a time limit, but not only does the timer move super slowly, there's also several opportunities to get extra time, extra speed, and also just straight up glide across the screen. Even without any of that, the animals are always in plain sight, and you're more than likely never gonna miss more than one of them, if even that, as long as you just keep pressing right and the jump button. And if you do miss an animal on the way back to the shack, you just go back, very easily spot it, and then head to the finish again, which goes by super fast even at Diego's base walking speed. Of the 3 levels, I guess the third one is slightly harder than the first 2, but we're talking about a microscopic increase in difficulty here. It's the only level on this list where you have to actively not be paying attention to lose, even on your first try. So congratulations to Dora's cousin for having the easiest level on this list. You earned it. Bombs? Up next we have Mario Party Island Tour, which, yes, does in fact have a story mode. Unlike the other Mario Party games, this game's story mode doesn't have you play on any of the boards, rather it has you climb Bowser's Tower where you face off against his minion clones and minigames, which is not only very easy but also incredibly repetitive. Don't worry though, sometimes they even amp up the minions to above easy difficulty.
Daring today, aren't we?
Thankfully, most of the boss fights are at least less monotonous. The only one I can really say offers any sort of real challenge is the King Bomb one. The way it works is actually kind of interesting. You gotta connect the conveyor belts in order to create a path for you to successfully deliver King Bomb's abandoned children back to him. And failure to do so before the time limit runs out results in taking damage to your own health bar instead of his. Once you get halfway through King Bob-omb's health bar, they do add a fourth track, which does make things a bit harder, and sometimes it can even be a little stressful doing it under pressure. You might be wondering why this is still so low having said all of that, and the reason for that is your health bar. You only have to beat King Bob-omb 4 times with the golden cannon, while you get so many tries that even if you trip up once or twice, the amount of forgiveness the game gives you is more than enough to get by. And while it can be a little confusing to look at, it's still a pretty simple code to crack. I actually think this boss fight is pretty neat despite the lack of difficulty though. Certainly one of the more creative Mario Party boss fights. Transitioning from Nintendo to Newgrounds, we have the first of many nostalgia bombs for me on this list, Mario Kombat. Here you control a Mario World-esque render of digital Chris Pratt, and you beat the ever-living shit out of a swarm of Koopas! It's easy to figure out how to do combos since they're built into the combat mechanics, and as such, all you gotta do is abuse the jump button and space out the Koopas, and most of the game is barely harder than hitting the sandbag in the Smash Bros. Training room. Once you get to Bowser, it does get a little tougher, keyword on a little. He breathes fire projectiles, which, to be fair, are hard to dodge all of them, but aside from taking a couple hits from those, Bowser's jumping phase is hilariously easy to not only avoid taking damage from, but even combo him during. And then he just stops moving and you can take out like a third of his health for free. Not to mention, your health bar is enormous and always replenishes every time you enter a new room, meaning you're starting off with full health once you reach Bowser, no matter what. Not to mention, you can basically just cheat by just waiting on the opposite side of the screen whenever Bowser attacks. The only reason this isn't even lower is because if you hit Bowser too many times during his flame attack, there's a chance the game will actually glitch and give Bowser a massive stat boost by making his flames an unavoidable wall, which literally makes it impossible for you to win. But as long as you don't do that, it's a very easy boss fight that ends with you punching Bowser's dead corpse. Damn, that's actually kinda dark. Even though the original Star Scramble trilogy is higher on this list, the Ghost Island version is an overall harder game, albeit slightly, for the most part. It just so happens there's one level that's counter to that, which we'll get to in a bit. Anyway, Star Scramble are a series of flash games where you play a bunch of ridiculously short and easy levels, where all you gotta do is collect 3 sunshines and head back to a nearby door. And in this case, they're just outdoor and ghost themed. 2-3 is a little harder than the other ones, only because it's the only level with a few moderately tight jumps, a boo that follows you around, and spiky beetles in your way that are somewhat close together, so you do have to watch your step a little more closely. Otherwise, this is still a cakewalk. Now we have absolute peak fiction on our hands. Super Mario Sluggers is unironically one of the most fun and batshit insane games I've ever had the pleasure of playing, and I think the story mode is super underrated. You go around all the stadiums solving puzzles and face Magic Koopa, Dry Bones, and Bros by doing pitching, batting, and fielding exercises in baseball. The story mode is also extremely unchallenging, which I personally really like because I think it adds to the charm of the goofy baseball adventure. However, I do remember the electric circuit puzzle in Wario City giving me some trouble as a kid and even as an adult. While I certainly wouldn't call it hard, it does stand out as harder than any of the other puzzles. You gotta move this magnet around the grid and move all the red, blue, and yellow pieces in their respective outlets, which are spread throughout. Doing this can be a bit tricky at first, as on top of the maze you gotta figure out, you're also relying on tilting a Wii remote, which is bound to cause some problems. But ultimately, you barely get penalized as the maze is super small, and if you do get electrocuted by the obstacles, we only get set back a couple of steps, which really only amounts to a handful of seconds. All in all, it's a mildly confusing puzzle that can be done without breaking a sweat in a couple of minutes if you're paying attention.
Would you like ham or food?
Taking a break from the Mario games for a bit, we have the Zack and Cody games, starting with the slightly easier one, Tipton Trouble. The goal of this game is to put up posters as Zack and Cody, while other members of the show's cast, including Mr. Mosby, try to stop you, for some reason. The fourth and final level is the hardest, as you gotta use the stairs and curtains to avoid just about every foe on screen, and unlike the other levels, you need to be able to forge your own path to the elevators and posters, instead of just having several easier paths to pick. You do have 3 lives, which does make it easier, but also is more limited than anything we've seen on this list so far. But I find that as long as I take it slow, and don't try to speedrun this level, it's still very manageable. And right after that, we have the slightly harder Zack and Cody game, Pizza Party Pickup. This game features 10 rooms where you have to collect a key card to unlock the elevator, which allows you to move on to the next one. Mr. Mosby, along with whichever members of the cast you choose not to play as, monitor the halls trying to stop you, for reasons that are not explained. Level 9 is the toughest one because it's the only one that has 2 different sections where you need to time yourself only 1 tile away from the monitors in pretty tight corners of the room. Like with the last game, you also have 3 lives, so depending on how many you keep up to this point, you get multiple tries. But frankly, I didn't even need those, since as long as you study their movements for a few seconds, you should be able to get past them no problem. The original Star Scramble trilogy is laughably easy, to the point where I'm just going to combine them into one section because I'm not extending this list just to have 2 more levels at the bottom that I could beat in a coma. The second game at least has 1 level that I actually need to put effort into, and that is the second and final World's Castle containing the Bowser fight. The reason this Bowser flashlight is higher than the Mario Kombat one is because this time there actually isn't a way to cheese it. You actually have to jump on all of these platforms with switches on them, eventually spawning a final switch on the floor to seal the deal. Because you constantly have to jump up, with the way the platforms are arranged, it can actually be kind of challenging to time all your jumps, as the cannonballs that are constantly falling down will insta-kill you. Granted, you do have enough time to react and dodge them, but that's easier said than done if you want to make all the jumps. Overall, this level is still not hard by any stretch, but for being as simple and short as it is, it provides at least a small challenge. CG Mario Level Pack is a handful of custom-made levels using assets from New Super Mario Bros. Games. Most of them are pretty short, and the only thing that makes them a little tougher than elementary is the abysmal lag. But otherwise, most of what you see here isn't that unusual. Mostly. The hardest level of the bunch is number 8, for 3 reasons. The first one is these guys in hazmat suits that throw snowballs at you in pairs of 3, meaning you need to thread the needle in order to get across and dodge all of them. The second reason is that Kamek hovers over the screen like Lakitu, except that he will specifically and intentionally drop fire on you in the most inconvenient spot possible. Both of these things happen twice in this level, whereas the third and final reason is the Yoshi Egg troll at the end, which, if you fall for, does this. Not to mention the lag is also still a factor. Once you know what to expect, all the obstacles here can be dealt with, and that, plus the fact that it's too short to place any higher, gives this level this spot. Alright, now it's time for the actual Mario games, and what better way than to start off with our first entry from the New Super Mario Bros. Series. Of the 5 games in this series, New Super Mario Bros. 2 is by far the easiest and most redundant level design-wise, not counting the DLC, but don't worry about that. Honestly, aside from some of the worst star coin placements I've ever seen, there isn't really a single full level that stands out as hard or something I can't just speedrun through or easily maneuver around. So instead, I went with the cannon from World Flower. This is way shorter than most of the other levels in this game, but it actually took me like 6 or 7 tries because of how fast you're forced to move. You gotta make these really tight jumps on bob-ombs with parachutes, and it's actually pretty stressful and requires a lot of precision. Plus, there's that one fake-out jump at the end, which is actually just evil. It's only this low because of how short it is, and it's not unfair, just precise. But if this were the same length as a full level, this would be a lot higher. Red Ball 1 is a game where you play as, well, one red ball. Each level has various obstacles, including a train, spikes, and...
Hey yo, what the fuck?
But the hardest one has gotta be the 10th level. Red Ball on the red ball. Here you gotta balance on a ball over a long stretch of spikes in order to reach the finish. This can be really obnoxious to deal with, especially with this being a computer game, so you gotta use these dinky ass buttons to wiggle yourself back and forth on another sphere you can easily roll off of at any given moment. But once you get the hang of it, it's manageable. So number 52 it is.
I am a robot.
Super Jim Jump is the most obvious Mario ripoff I've ever seen. So basically this game consists of 4 worlds which are all definitely original, and the Cyberpunk, I mean Robot one, has the one that stood out to me the most. Mostly because the robot boss is easily the hardest part of the game. This toaster on wheels looking ass thing moves really fast across the already small stage, and you're really relying on this game's equivalent of the Fire Flower and Superstar, which are Axis and Pride Month skin respectively. This makes like 2/3 of the fight a game of pick up a bunch of shit on stage and then clobber the robot, but for the last third it's likely you'll run out of power-ups to keep you safe, at least for a little while. And being forced to stay on the defensive against something that's much faster than you puts you in a lot more danger than any other level we've covered thus far. Now we got our first fully fleshed out console game boss fight, starting with the very first Skylanders game, which is by far the easiest of the bunch, especially if you have an army of fully upgraded Skylanders across the franchise. Pretty much every level in this game isn't too bad, but the difficulty does noticeably go up a little bit at the very end. Chapter 22, Layer of Chaos, is the peak of difficulty for this game. The rotating blade sections, while slow, are very deadly and can very easily take you out if you're not careful. Aside from that, you got your standard chaos level layout, including the final battle, and while he does have a lot of phases to get through, there's ways to cheese pretty much all of them, especially if you're using any of these three. I was able to kill the Skylander enemy clones immediately after they spawn, and while the red poison magic phases are a little harder, you can just still walk around most of them pretty easily. Not to mention, there's tons of food given to you to heal throughout the battle, making it even easier. Finally, you have the dragon head part, which, again, really not that difficult if you just spam moves from these three. This level is only this high because it's a lot longer than the ones below it, and has a lot more sections to get through, but for the most part, it's really not that big of a deal. I will say, the fact that Chaos pulls up in a hood looking like Amazing Spider-Man 2 Electro, and acts surprised when you do not in fact lose to his easy-ass boss fight, really does make him that much funnier of a villain, especially in this game. Next is a pretty standard arcade beat-em-up, just Ninja Turtle themed. Not much to say here, you gotta fight the Shredder and whittle down his health bar. It takes a while to do, but it is a very simple task, and while he is more resilient than any of the other obstacles or enemies below him on this list, as long as you keep hitting him, it's only a matter of time before he gets packed up. Bringing in the second easiest New Super Mario Bros. Game, we have the first DS one, and the first one in the entire miniseries. This game is definitely the most balanced in terms of difficulty and consistently creative and well-made level design, though it's not my personal favorite. Most of the game stays on the same wavelength of difficulty, that is until you get to World 8, where pretty much every level took at least several more tries to clear. So I was surprised to find out upon replaying it that the level I had the hardest time with is one most people probably don't even remember, World 6-Tower. Pretty much every New Soup game has tower or castle levels filled with skewers, but this one stands out amongst the bunch by making it a lot more claustrophobic than the other ones. The amount of space you have to dodge the skewers is very limited, and while it is clearly laid out and not terribly difficult to get into, I really like how consistent the pace is. It's a very fair level, but it's also very easy to slip up, especially when getting the star coins. But what really takes this level over the edge is that it forces you to get a mini mushroom, do a really hard wall jump into a pipe, then make a jump across 4 skewers to get the last star coin. Not to mention, if you don't have another power-up in your pocket, you have to fight Bowser Jr. in extra light and floaty form that also kills you in one hit, which actually makes him a real threat for once. The New Soup series has way more brutal stages to offer, but in the very first game, this level stands out as one that requires a variety of different decent skills to get through.
Welcome back to Soup.
Fun fact, Mario Maker does in fact have a story mode. It's mostly composed of hot garbage that could have been made by a 5-year-old, but there were 4 limited edition levels that were clearly made by professionals, the hardest of which being the 4th and final one of the bunch. It's kinda like a rendition of the final castle in the original Mario game from 1985, only with modern mechanics and less confusing level design that makes it much more palatable. You got the underwater section, wall jumps, some Yoshi shenanigans, and a brief Bowser fight at the end. Each section is about the same middling level of difficulty, not super easy but not the end of the world either, which adds up to a pretty average challenge. Fun fact, Mario Party 8 does in fact have a story mode. I'm actually combining 8 and 9 since both of them work very similarly, and the Boo House stages are also the hardest to get through for both. In Mario Party 8 and 9, you must win against 2 to 3 other CPUs across each stage in the game, meaning a lot of it does come down to luck, but between the CPU difficulty settings being low by default, and Mario Party CPUs constantly making random and dumb decisions, common sense will also give you a pretty big leg up. That is, until you get to Boo's Horror Castle, where you don't even know where the star is, and just have to hope the other CPUs don't find it first. King Boo's Haunted Hideaway in 9 is a little better since it's an easier stage, except you might get licked by a ghost and lose half your mini-stars anyway because of bad luck completely outside of your control. So then again, I don't know.
There's 2 of them!
Winning against the CPUs isn't hard, but couple these 2 stages' unpredictable gimmicks with the agonizingly long runtime, and you have 2 pretty big nuisances to get through. I don't think most people consider this to be the hardest level in Super Mario Land, but for me 3-1 was the toughest part of the game. This is a weird level, filled to the brim with Moai statues in several forms. Background ornaments, the ones that jump around with wings, and the ones that run at you really fast. These combinations can be really confusing to deal with because unlike most enemies in this game, their attack patterns aren't that easy to predict, especially the running ones. There's also some tricky platforming here and there, which would be fine on its own, but sometimes the Moai statues can trap you at really wonky angles feels with how all over the place the level is. There's also an easier version of the red ball level from earlier at the end here, but I still put this level higher for the other parts before that. Plus, this level just feels really long. There's a lot of moving parts here, but once you map out all the right jumps, it can be done. Deltarune Chapter 1 is mostly pretty manageable, or at least it would be if I knew how to play RPGs.
Why can't I find
The menu.
Luckily, I did manage to do this one, and out of all the challenges here, I think what is essentially a troll boss takes the cake, surprisingly enough. I'm not even going to spoil what you actually have to do in order to win against K-Round, but let me tell you, until you do, you are completely screwed. No amount of healing or combos will save you without the ultimate secret, no matter how dumb that secret is. I can't really justify putting this boss fight any lower than this because of how much seething I experienced fighting K-Round, but objectively speaking, there's no way I can say this is harder than anything above it, which, funny enough, is kind of the opposite of the next 3 levels. The next few entries are all from some of the most childhood-defining games on the list, and as such, their placements are likely influenced by all the experience I had with them, more than most of the other ones. You could make an argument for any of these being ranked a lot higher, and are only this low because I played them a lot more often. Starting off this trio is Puke the Pirate, an 8-level platform game where you play as a pirate that projectile vomits and shits himself to fly.
I'm shitting!
The 2 toughest levels are 6 and 8, but in the end I went with 6 because there's basically 0 cooldown periods. Between the cannonballs, projectile squids, and constant gaps, there's almost never a safe place to stand without having to dodge, let alone being able to jump across. And the thing is, while you do have to constantly be on your toes, that alone wouldn't be too bad if the game's engine wasn't a potato. Even back in the 2000s, lag was always a potential hindrance to the game, but in this level especially, it can be an absolute nightmare. Especially with the slippery mechanics too, because it basically means no matter what you do, you're always at risk of getting hit with some bullshit. Now the silver lining is that there are ways to collect lots of lives, and also beans that let you fly over big parts of the course, and sometimes you can find ways to make sure the lag doesn't screw you over if you're lucky. Plus, this game's levels are made for kids, so even this one isn't going to have any truly awful obstacles. But it's still high in potential for rage quits if lag isn't on your side.
Bill says we're in some place called Albuquerque.
Skylanders Giants is by far the most fair and balanced game of the Skylanders series. While its predecessor was too easy and the following games really start to run up the heat, this one hits that sweet spot of being reasonably challenging without making you want to pull your hair out. Even so, there is one level that's always stood out to me as a lot more rigorous than the others, and that's the 10th chapter, where you're put through a whole gauntlet. First, you gotta fend off enemies boarding the ship, who often corner you and jump you with the constant onslaught on a super inconvenient battlefield. Once you get past that, there's a section where you need to use a lanky Wii remote aim to shoot down enemy ships, then go across another rotating blade section, which are always fun, and then fight a whole army that, if you're not careful, can easily corner you and force you to take lethal damage. This level stands out because unlike most of the chapters in Giants, this is the only one where not a single section gives you a break. Every single one will give you at least some sort of trouble. And while nothing here is too cruel, it's more about the sum of its parts that's gonna make this far from a walk in the park. Wrapping up the childhood trio here, we have the #1 game of my childhood, and my personal favorite game on this entire list, New Super Mario Bros. Wii. This is the first game in the New Soup series where things start to pick up a bit. While the first half of the game is still very much in sleep-inducingly easy territory, once you get to World 6, you'll start to see things pick up a bit, which steadily get harder with more and more unique gimmicks. Thing is, even throughout Worlds 6 through 9, there's nearly always very generous platforms, empty space built in for multiplayer, and abundant power-ups that keep things from getting too intense. But there is one glaring exception to this rule, and if you've ever cleared this game, you already know what it is. 9-7 is one of the most infamous Mario levels due to its very apparent lack of breathing room, specifically induced by this little shop of horrors ass shit on screen you're gonna see right here, with the caveat that they all breathe fire. That, and there's a distinct lack of floor in the second half of the level, as you and the plants play a game of chicken to decide who's gonna burn the ice platforms first, which will make your life harder either way. The trick here is to snipe the piranha plants with the fire flower without breaking the ice, slide under the row of pipes without using the flower, and dodge or damage boost through the plants. Then get rid of just enough of the obstacles blocking you from the star coins and flagpole without destroying the rest of the stage in the process, which, you know, easier said than done. unless you're an epic gamer like me. This level is where we start to get into the solidly hard portion of this list. While this level definitely ain't easy, I personally find it looks a lot more threatening than it actually is. Especially if I equip a propeller suit and dodge the first half of the level and use that momentum to get across the rest. I've tried it and it's a lot of fun. And a lot of people might be surprised to see it this low, but trust me, you'll see why when we get to part 2.